It was 1982, and Gulf and Western was in trouble. A recent downturn in the arcade market had seriously hurt the company and its subsidiaries. This downturn was very substantial to Sega, as it opened the doors to being a home console manufacturer rather than solely an arcade one. Today, join me as we discuss the history of the Sega Master System. As markets were getting worse, Sega took notice in the newly expanding home console market, and they particularly noticed the cutting-edge ColecoVision. Coleco had recently entered the console market after previously being a successful toy and leather company, but they wanted to expand their market to Japan. Sega saw an opportunity, and in 1982 they struck a deal with Coleco stating that Sega would distribute the ColecoVision in Japan in return for porting Sega games to the console. While Coleco did let Sega make games for their console, Sega never ended up releasing the ColecoVision in Japan. However, by this time, Coleco had lost interest in the console market as they had hit it big with the Cabbage Patch Kids line of toys, and also because the console market had started to crash in North America. Sega didn't give up though. In 1983, they did release a console, but it was their own. The Sega SG-1000 came out on July 15th, 1983, and on the same day as Nintendo's Famicom. Retailing at a price of 15,000 yen, or about $139, it had two types of readable media, cartridges, and with an add-on, you could load small cards that were inserted into the system called Sega My Cards. On July 31st, 1984, they released the SG-1000 II. It boasted minor improvements, such as the expansion port being moved to the front for a detachable keyboard, as well as a redesigned controller, similar to the NES controller. The SG-1000 II was also priced at 15,000 yen. Unfortunately for Sega, it was behind from the very beginning, as the Famicom was cheaper, only costing 13,000 yen, was far more powerful than Sega's offerings, with the SG-1000 only having graphics comparable to the ColecoVisions, and as the Famicom was easily crushing other competitors such as the Epoch's Cassette Vision and Commodore's Commodore 64 game system, Sega had to fight their way to stay relevant. They only managed to hang on due to its large library of arcade games that could easily be ported to the SG-1000. But perhaps the nail in the coffin is that Sega also relaunched the SG-3000 microcomputer on the same day, which could do everything the 1000 could do, plus more, eating away at the sales of the 1000. After it was all said and done, Japan and New Zealand were the only countries that ever got the console, with only 160,000 units sold. Despite this, it is believed that Sega still profited off the SG-1000. Regardless of whether Sega made money or not, they knew they were running a losing race, as the SG-1000 started to lose steam. So in response to Nintendo releasing the Famicom worldwide as the Nintendo Entertainment System, Sega got to work updating the SG-1000 for a global release. The same team that worked on the Sega SG-1000 also worked on this new console. The result was a console named the Sega Mark III that has various advantages to the previous SG-1000 models, such as the CPU being changed from the 1000's 3 5/8 MHz Z80A to the SG-3000's 4 MHz Z80A. Other improvements include enhanced sound and graphics to be more powerful than the Famicom as well. It also had the Sega card reader built right into the console rather than an add-on. On top of all this, it was completely backwards compatible with Sega's previous console. The Sega Mark III was released in Japan in October 1985 at the same price as the SG-1000. Pressure was high for the console's success, with some games getting a maximum of 3 months development time. Some hurdles they had to overcome was Nintendo's licensing policy, stating that third-party publishers could not make games for other consoles if they were to make games for the NES. This forced Sega to either make games of their own, or license games from other console manufacturers. This worked okay at best, but what they really needed was something to help spark their console into the mainstream. Before I start in the next section, there is one detail worth mentioning that really didn't fit anywhere else in this video, and that is in 1982, after the SG-1000's initial release, Gulf and Western decided to sell Gremlin, renaming it to Sega Electronics, as well as all other North American departments other than the Research and Development Department. They sold it to Bally Midway. However, David Rosen, Hayao Nakayama, and the company's CSK's chairman, Isao Okawa, still saw potential in the remaining assets of Sega. In April of 1984, they promptly bought Sega of Japan from Gulf and Western, making Sega once again a Japanese-based company. Back to Sega's new console. The break they needed came when they went to take the console global. Sega of America had been re-established in 1985, and the NES was already hitting it big. Sega decided to take the Mark III to Western markets. First, they redesigned the Mark III to have a futuristic look that Sega thought would appeal to the Western audiences. They also wanted a new name for the system. In marketing, they simply called it the Sega Video Game System.
Only on the Sega system. Sega, the challenge will always be there.
But on the console's boot-up screen, it says Master System. This is because Sega released in sets, similar to how Nintendo sold the NES with the Action Set or the Deluxe Set. In the Americas, there were 3 sets. The base system, which was the budget system, that included the console, plus 2 controllers. Then there's the Master System, which includes everything the base system had, plus the Light Phaser, which was Sega's equivalent to the NES Zapper, as well as including the only system launch titles, which was a double cartridge of the games Hang On and Safari Hunt. Finally, the Sega Video Game System, also known as the Sega Scope 3D system, includes everything previous, except for it also has the 3D glasses, and it swaps out the packing game with the 3D glasses compatible Missile Defense 3D. In Europe, they had the same bundles, but the base system was called the Master System was called the Master System Plus, and the Sega Scope 3D was called the Super System. Additionally, depending on the year your Master System came out, it would have a different built-in game. Most Model 310s had a minigame Snail Maze. 310As had Hang On plus Safari Hunt. 310Bs had Hang On and Astro Warrior, but some just had Hang On. And finally, 310Cs had Missile Defense 3D. At launch, the Master System and the base system were both available, but the Master System did much better because consumers were getting more for a cheaper price. This resulted in the Master System name sticking around for the rest of the console's life. In 1986, Sega planned to release the Master System in North America. They aimed for a September release, but most didn't reach store shelves until October. During the fall and winter months, Sega, along with Nintendo, each sank $15 million into ad campaigns for their consoles. One of Sega's strategies was to say that they had the first box art to show what the game actually looked like. Sega's goal was to sell between 400,000 and 750,000 Master Systems by the end of 1986. Unfortunately, Sega ended up in a distant second place, with only 125,000 units sold, compared to Atari's 112,000 and Nintendo's 1.1 million units sold. This is partly due to Sega only having 2 third-party American publishers, being Activision and the Parker Brothers. On August 17, 1987, after several poor months of sales, Sega CEO Hayao Nakayama sold a 2-year distribution contract to Tonka, who owned Parker Brothers at the time. Tonka was responsible for the sales and distribution of the console, with Sega believing they would have more access to getting the Master System onto store shelves. Sega of America would still handle support, while Sega of Japan would continue to produce software. Unfortunately though, Tonka had never marketed a video game console before, and therefore they didn't know what they were doing. Tonka blocked localization of some of the more popular games, and they were very generous in their marketing of Sega's console, spending $30 million on Master System advertisements. Although this did lead to $90 million worth of sales between July and December of 1987, which was a figure of 20% higher than they expected, the firm failed to sell 1 million consoles within 2 years, leading to Sega getting distribution rights back. But even when Sega didn't have distribution rights in North America, they still utilized the Master System. In October of 1987, Sega released the Master System in Japan with graphical and sound enhancements for 16,800 yen. It still sold poorly, as did the Mark III. Samsung also released this version of the Master System in Korea, due to Korea having a ban on Japanese products since World War II. These versions are called the Game Boy and sometimes the Aladdin Boy. When Sega finally got their distribution rights back, the Sega Genesis was already out and it put the Master System onto the back burner. Because of this, Sega remodeled the Master System into a compact console with rounded edges. It was dubbed the Master System 2. This new design saved on manufacturing costs, and they also bundled every console with a game built in. From 1989 to 1991, it was bundled with Alex Kidd and Miracle World, and from then on, it was bundled with Sonic the Hedgehog. The console would now be referred to as the Sega Master System or the Power Base from now on. It's also worth noting that Samsung released a version of this console in Korea, known as the Game Boy 2 or the Aladdin 2. As hard as Sega tried to keep the Master System alive, it just fizzled out, with only 1.2 to 2 million units sold in North America, with only 12% of the market share at its height. In 1992, Sega canceled production of all Master Systems. Even though the Master System didn't do too well in North America and in Japan, it still had a big impact on the world and on Sega itself. It established new characters, such as former Sega mascot Alex Kidd, and in Europe and in Brazil, it actually sold quite well, bringing total sales to between 10 and 13 million units by 1992. And was so popular in Brazil that the Brazil distributor, called Tectoy, still sells Master Systems new to this very day. And though the last game for the system was Sonic the Hedgehog in 1991, the last game for Brazil was Mickey's Ultimate Challenge in 1998. Finally, Sega used the Master System in an add-on called the Power Base Converter for the Sega Genesis, which allowed backwards compatibility with all Master System games. This was really important because it gave them an edge over Nintendo with parents that were still upset that the Super Nintendo didn't have backwards compatibility with the NES. Arguably though, the Master System's last contribution was when Sega created the Game Gear to compete against Nintendo's popular Game Boy. The Game Gear was basically an upgraded Master System in the palm of your hand, and it came with several ports of Master System games and vice versa. And while the Game Gear didn't quite sell as well as the Game Boy, it still sold well, and established Sega as more than just a console manufacturer, but a handheld one too. So that is the story of the Sega Master System. While it didn't let the world on fire or anything, it did set the stage for Sega as a company later on, and I know it will continue to live in my heart and so many others for years to come. Thank you guys for watching, and if you guys have any video suggestions you would like, please leave them down below. And after this video, I'm probably going to be working on videos on smaller games that came around this time probably. And then after maybe one or two of those, I'm gonna go back to doing the Genesis history. So that's about all I have today. Thank you all for watching again, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.